What happens when America's sweetheart meets Hollywood's most unpredictable late-night host? You won't believe what unfolds when Sandra Bullock sits down for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to find herself in the crosshairs of Jimmy Kimmel's most controversial moment yet. This isn't just another celebrity spat. This is a career-defining confrontation that left audiences stunned and social media in absolute chaos. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses faces off against a host who clearly came prepared for war. The stage was set like any other Tuesday night at the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio. The familiar blue backdrop gleamed under the studio lights. The audience buzzed with anticipation, and Sandra Bullock walked out to thunderous applause, her signature warm smile lighting up the room. She looked radiant in a sleek black blazer, waving to the crowd as she took her seat across from Kimmel, who sat behind his desk with an expression that seemed unusually intense for what should have been a light-hearted promotional appearance. "Sandra Bullock, everybody," Kimmel announced, his voice carrying an edge that seasoned viewers might have recognized as trouble brewing. The audience's cheers gradually died down as Bullock settled into her chair, crossing her legs and leaning forward with the practiced ease of someone who had done thousands of interviews throughout her decades-long career. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy," Bullock said, her voice warm and genuine. "Always a pleasure to be here." But Kimmel's response wasn't the typical banter viewers expected. Instead of diving into the usual promotional material about her latest project, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming against his desk in a rhythm that seemed almost predatory. "Sandra, I have to ask you something," Kimmel began, his tone shifting from welcoming host to something more confrontational. "There's been a lot of talk lately about your stance on various social issues, and I'm curious about your recent comments regarding the entertainment industry's responsibility to address political matters." The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Bullock's smile faltered slightly, not from uncertainty, but from the sudden realization that this wasn't going to be the friendly chat she had anticipated. The audience sensed the shift too, their energy becoming more attentive, more focused. "I'm not sure what specific comments you're referring to, Jimmy," Bullock replied carefully, her media training kicking in. "I've always believed that as public figures, we have a responsibility to be thoughtful about the platforms we're given. But I try to let my work speak for itself." Kimmel's eyes narrowed slightly, and he pulled out a tablet from behind his desk. "Well, let me refresh your memory. Last month, at the Children's Defense Fund benefit, you said, and I quote, 'Too many people in this business use their platforms to lecture others while living in their own isolated bubbles.' That's interesting, coming from someone who's been pretty vocal about certain causes herself." The studio audience grew quieter, sensing that this wasn't typical late-night television fare. Bullock's posture straightened, her professional demeanor intact, but her eyes showing the first flash of genuine irritation. "Jimmy, I think you might be taking that comment out of context," she said, her voice remaining steady but carrying a new firmness. "I was speaking about the importance of authenticity and actually doing the work rather than just talking about it. I've been involved in various charitable efforts for over 2 decades, quietly, without making it about publicity." "Quietly?" Kimmel interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Sandra, come on. Your publicist sends out press releases about your charitable work all the time. Just last year, there were at least 6 major media outlets that covered your hurricane relief efforts. That doesn't exactly scream quietly to me." The confrontation was escalating faster than anyone in the studio had anticipated. Bullock's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and she leaned forward in her chair, her hands clasped together in what appeared to be an effort to maintain her composure. "Jimmy, I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here," she said, her voice now carrying an unmistakable chill. "When people are suffering, when communities need help, visibility can actually be beneficial. It encourages others to get involved, to donate, to care." Are you suggesting that celebrities should just stay silent when they have the ability to make a difference? Kimmel wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by her pushback, leaning forward across his desk like a prosecutor closing in on a key witness. I'm not suggesting anything, Sandra. I'm asking you directly. Don't you think there's something hypocritical about criticizing others for using their platforms while simultaneously using yours to promote your own agenda? The word agenda landed like a slap across the studio. Several audience members could be heard shifting uncomfortably in their seats, and Bullock's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The warm, approachable movie star was gone, replaced by someone who had clearly reached her limit. "My agenda?" she repeated, her voice incredulous. "Jimmy, helping children get access to education and supporting disaster relief efforts isn't an agenda. It's basic human decency. What exactly are you accusing me of here?" The tension in the studio was now palpable, crackling like electricity before a storm. Kimmel's production team, visible in the background, looked increasingly uncomfortable, with several crew members exchanging worried glances as their host continued his aggressive line of questioning. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Kimmel said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just trying to understand how someone can criticize the very behavior they themselves engage in. It seems like a pretty clear case of Hollywood hypocrisy to me." That phrase, Hollywood hypocrisy, was clearly a bridge too far. Bullock's eyes flashed with genuine anger, and for the first time in the interview, her carefully maintained professional facade began to crack. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more weight than if she had shouted. "Are you seriously going to sit there and lecture me about hypocrisy? You who makes jokes about serious issues every single night, who profits from mocking people's pain and struggles, want to question my integrity?" The studio fell dead silent. Even the usual background noise of cameras and equipment seemed to pause as Bullock's words hung in the air. Kimmel's confident smirk wavered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered, his expression hardening. "Sandra, I think you're overreacting," he said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments before. "This is just a conversation." "No, Jimmy," Bullock shot back, her voice now rising with controlled fury. "This isn't a conversation. This is an ambush. You brought me here under false pretenses, and now you're trying to paint me as some kind of hypocrite for the entertainment of your audience. Well, let me tell you something about integrity." But before she could finish her sentence, Kimmel interrupted again, and what he said next would prove to be the point of no return, the moment that transformed a heated exchange into something far more explosive and career-defining. "Sandra, let's be honest here," Kimmel said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've been in this business for 30 years. You've made hundreds of millions of dollars playing America's sweetheart while real people struggle with the very issues you claim to care about. Don't you think it's a little rich that you're lecturing anyone about authenticity?" The words hit Bullock like a physical blow. Her face went through a series of emotions in rapid succession: shock, hurt, and then a cold, steely anger that made the studio lights seem to dim around her. The audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented in late-night television history. "Rich?" Bullock repeated, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the studio. "You want to talk about what's rich, Jimmy? What's rich is you sitting behind that desk, making millions of dollars a year to mock and humiliate people, and then having the audacity to question my character." She stood up slightly in her chair, her entire body language shifting from defensive to offensive. The transformation was startling. This wasn't the Sandra Bullock audiences knew from romantic comedies and heartwarming dramas. This was someone who had been pushed too far and was about to push back harder. "You know what's really rich?" she continued, her voice gaining strength and fury with each word. "The fact that you invited me here tonight, not to promote my work, not to have a genuine conversation, but to ambush me for whatever sick entertainment value you think this provides. You've turned what should be a professional interview into a personal attack. And for what? Ratings? Kimmel's face was flushing, red now, and he gripped the edge of his desk with white knuckles. Sandra, I think you need to calm down. This is my show, and I have every right to ask challenging questions. Challenging questions? Bullock laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitter disbelief. Jimmy, there's a difference between challenging questions and character assassination. You're not some hard-hitting journalist exposing corruption. You're a comedian who's decided to cosplay as a moral authority, and frankly, it's pathetic. The studio audience was now completely captivated by the spectacle unfolding before them. Several people in the front row were filming with their phones, despite the show's no recording policy, sensing they were witnessing television history in the making. Kimmel's attempt to maintain control was crumbling. You know what, Sandra? Maybe the problem isn't my questions. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle being called out on your contradictions. You want to be seen as this perfect charitable saint, but when someone points out the inconsistencies in your narrative, you fall apart. That accusation was like gasoline on an already raging fire. Bullock shot to her feet, her chair rolling, backward from the force of her movement. The studio lighting caught the fury in her eyes, making them appear almost luminous with rage. "Fall apart?" she said, her voice now carrying across the studio with commanding authority. "Jimmy, I've been in this business since before you were even a punchline at comedy clubs. I've dealt with real criticism, real challenges, real hardships. What I haven't dealt with is a supposed professional trying to ambush a guest for cheap ratings." She took a step toward his desk, and the cameras automatically adjusted to capture the dramatic moment. "You want to talk about contradictions? Let's talk about yours. You make jokes about mental health issues, then claim to care about awareness. You mock people's appearances, then advocate for anti-bullying campaigns. You profit from division and controversy, then act surprised when your guests don't want to play along with your little games." Kimmel was visibly struggling now, his usual quick wit seemingly abandoned, as he faced an opponent who was more than capable of matching his verbal aggression. "Sandra, you're being completely unreasonable. I asked you legitimate questions about statements you made publicly." "Legitimate questions?" Bullock's voice rose to a level that made several audience members visibly flinch. "You called my charitable work an agenda. You suggested that helping children and disaster victims is somehow hypocritical. You turned a promotional interview into a personal attack, and now you want to hide behind the pretense of journalism?" She leaned forward, placing her hands on his desk, bringing herself closer to his eye level. The camera caught every detail of her expression. The fury, the disappointment, and underneath it all, the hurt of someone who had genuinely not seen this coming. "Let me ask you something, Jimmy," she said, her voice now dangerously quiet. "When was the last time you actually helped someone without cameras rolling? When was the last time you donated your time, your money, your energy to something that didn't directly benefit your career or your public image?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but Bullock wasn't finished. "Because I can tell you exactly when I last did those things. I can tell you about the families I've helped relocate after disasters, the scholarship programs I've funded anonymously, the medical bills I've paid for people who will never know my name. Can you say the same?" The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafeningly loud. Kimmel's face had gone from red to pale, and his usual confident demeanor had completely evaporated. He looked like a man who had started a fight he couldn't finish. "Sandra, I think maybe we should take a break," he stammered, looking toward his production team with an expression that bordered on panic. "Oh no, Jimmy," Bullock said, straightening up to her full height. "You started this conversation. You wanted to question my integrity, my authenticity, my right to use my platform for good. So let's finish it." The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Several crew members were making frantic gestures from the wings, clearly trying to signal for a commercial break, but Bullock's commanding presence seemed to hold everyone in place. "You know what I think this is really about?" she continued, beginning to pace slightly in front of his desk, like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "I think you're jealous. I think you're bitter that some of us in this industry actually use our success to make a difference, while others just use it to tear people down for entertainment." Kimmel finally found his voice again, though it came out strained and defensive. "Sandra, that's completely unfair. I've raised millions of dollars for charity through this show." "Have you, Jimmy?" Bullock shot back immediately. "Or have you had your producers organize charity segments that happen to make you look good while generating positive press for the show? There's a difference between actual philanthropy and performative charity, and deep down, you know which category you fall into." The accusation seemed to hit its mark. Kimmel's jaw clenched, and his eyes flashed with anger. "You know what, Sandra? You're way out of line. This is my show, and I don't have to sit here and listen to you attack me." "Attack you?" Bullock's laugh was sharp and incredulous. "Jimmy, you've spent the last 10 minutes systematically trying to destroy my reputation on national television, and now you're claiming that I'm attacking you? The hypocrisy is absolutely stunning." She moved closer to the desk again, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "You want to see what an actual attack looks like? Because what you've done tonight isn't journalism, it isn't entertainment, and it certainly isn't professional. It's bullying, plain and simple." The word bullying seemed to trigger something in Kimmel. His face flushed red again, and he stood up behind his desk, finally meeting her energy with his own. "Bullying?" he said, his voice rising to match hers. "Sandra, you're a grown woman worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You're not a victim here. You're a celebrity who can't handle being asked tough questions about your public statements." That response was the final straw. Bullock's expression shifted from anger to something approaching disgust, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a finality that made it clear the interview was about to take a dramatic turn. "You know what, Jimmy?" she said, her voice now eerily calm after the storm of fury that had preceded it. "I've been in this business long enough to recognize a bully when I see one. And what you've done tonight isn't just unprofessional, it's cruel. It's the kind of behavior that destroys careers, damages reputations, and hurts real people for the sake of a few minutes of viral content." She walked around to the side of his desk, positioning herself where she could address both Kimmel and the audience directly. The cameras followed her movement, capturing every nuance of her expression as she prepared to deliver what would become one of the most memorable moments in late-night television history. "I came here tonight to talk about my work, to connect with your audience, to maybe share a few laughs," she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Instead, I've been subjected to what can only be described as a character assassination attempt by someone who clearly has his own issues with successful women in this industry." The accusation of sexism hit the studio like a thunderbolt. Kimmel's face went white, then red, then white again. "Sandra, that's completely unfair, and you know it. This has nothing to do with gender. Doesn't it, Jimmy?" Bullock turned to face him directly, her eyes blazing with renewed intensity. "When was the last time you ambushed a male guest like this? When was the last time you questioned a man's right to be charitable, to have opinions, to use his platform for good? Because I've watched your show, and I've never seen you go after George Clooney's humanitarian work, or attack Matt Damon's water initiatives, or question Leonardo DiCaprio's environmental activism." The comparison was devastating in its accuracy, and everyone in the studio knew it. Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The confident, quick-witted host who had started this confrontation was nowhere to be found. "You see, Jimmy, that's the real problem here," Bullock continued, beginning to pace again like a lawyer making her closing argument. "You've revealed something ugly about yourself tonight, and you can't take it back. You've shown your audience, your staff, and the world that when faced with a woman who won't back down, who won't apologize for her success or her convictions, you resort to the oldest tactics in the book. You try to tear her down. She stopped pacing and turned to address the studio audience directly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight is exactly what's wrong with this industry. It's not enough for women. To be successful, we have to constantly justify that success, defend our right to have opinions, and prove that we deserve the platforms we've earned. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. Several people in the front rows were visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as they processed the gravity of what they were witnessing. Bullock turned back to Kimmel, who was now slumped in his chair, looking like a man who had just realized the magnitude of his mistake. You know what the most pathetic part of all this is, Jimmy? You had the opportunity to have a real conversation with someone who's actually making a difference in the world. Instead, you chose to use your platform to tear down someone who's dedicated their life to helping others. That says everything about your character and nothing about mine. She walked back toward her chair, not to sit down, but to collect her purse from beside it. The simple action spoke volumes. She was done, finished, ready to leave. But she wasn't quite finished speaking. "I want everyone watching tonight to understand something," she said, her voice now carrying the weight of 3 decades in Hollywood. "This is what happens when women succeed in this industry. We get questioned, attacked, and told we're hypocrites for caring about anything beyond our own careers. We're damned if we stay silent, and damned if we speak up." Kimmel finally managed to find his voice, though it came out weak and strained. "Sandra, please, can we start over? This got out of hand." The request was pathetic in its desperation, and Bullock's response was swift and merciless. "Start over? Jimmy, you can't unsay what you've said tonight. You can't undo the damage you've tried to do to my reputation. And you certainly can't pretend that this was anything other than a calculated attack designed to humiliate me for your own entertainment." She slung her purse over her shoulder and took a step toward the exit, but then stopped and turned back one final time. "You know what I'm going to do tomorrow, Jimmy? I'm going to wake up and continue the work I've been doing for decades. I'm going to help children get access to education, support disaster relief efforts, and use my platform to make the world a little bit better. What are you going to do? Make jokes about tonight's disaster?" The silence that followed was deafening. Kimmel sat frozen behind his desk, his usual confident demeanor completely shattered. His production team was frantically signaling from the wings, but he seemed unable to process their directions. "I want to thank your audience for witnessing this," Bullock said, turning toward the crowd. "Not because I enjoyed it, but because I hope it serves as a lesson. This is what bullying looks like when it's dressed up as entertainment. This is what happens when power is used to tear people down instead of build them up." Several audience members began to applaud, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. The sound seemed to break through Kimmel's stunned silence, and he finally attempted to regain control of his show. "Sandra, wait!" he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Let's talk about this. We can work this out." But Bullock was already walking toward the exit, her heels clicking decisively against the studio floor. She paused at the edge of the stage, just before disappearing behind the curtain, and delivered her final words of the evening. "Jimmy, the only thing we need to work out is your own conscience. Because what you've done tonight isn't just a betrayal of professional standards, it's a betrayal of basic human decency. I hope it was worth it." With that, Sandra Bullock walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live set, leaving behind a stunned audience, a shell-shocked host, and what would become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. The cameras continued rolling as Kimmel sat in stunned silence, his desk suddenly feeling like an island of isolation in a sea of judgment. The show's producers finally managed to cut to commercial, but the damage was done. In the span of 20 minutes, A routine promotional interview had transformed into a masterclass in how power dynamics, gender bias, and professional jealousy could combine to create television gold, albeit not the kind Jimmy Kimmel had intended to create. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience filed out in hushed, animated conversations, one thing was crystal clear. Sandra Bullock had just reminded everyone exactly why she was considered one of Hollywood's most respected figures, while Jimmy Kimmel had revealed something about himself that no amount of damage control could undo. The night had started with a standard celebrity interview, but it had ended with a woman standing up for herself, her values, and every other woman who had ever been told she was too successful, too opinionated, or too authentic for her own good. The final image of the evening was of an empty chair where America's sweetheart had been sitting, and a host who had learned the hard way that some battles are better left unfought.